Susan Thornton, thank you very much for coming to UNC Chapel Hill. Thank you very much for your lecture at the Krasnodar Event Series. We all enjoyed it. And you are the former acting Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs in the US State Department. Now you're at the research scholar at Yale University. And you entitled your talk, it was a question, can we live with China? Let me ask you, how can we manage to live with China?
Well, thank you very much, Klaus, for having me here today. I really enjoyed it. My perception of this question is that usually, traditionally, the U.S. has seen China as an opportunity. For the last couple hundred years of history of interaction between the U.S. and China, we've always tried to open China up, to bring it into the world system, and to, in concert with U.S. interests, try to see what could be done with China and take advantage of those opportunities. And I think where we are now is we're hitting a roadblock, thinking that maybe the opportunities have run their course. We're getting a little bit, I think, over-exaggerated about the threat that China poses to the United States, and we've lost the sight on finding the opportunities. And I think we need to get back to finding a constructive, cooperative way of working with China. Of course, we have a lot of differences and problems, but I think we've shown over time that we can manage and solve some of those problems. We'll continue to have disagreements, but we have to work on them. And there's a lot of areas where we have overlapping interests where we should productively cooperate for the betterment of our peoples and the rest of the global community.
Thank you very much. You mentioned that there are quite a few problems in American Chinese and Western Chinese relations, if you like. How would you identify the most pressing problems which need to be addressed? Which are the ones?
Well, I think we started to see a kind of a shift in China after the 2008 great financial crisis. So it really does predate the elevation of Xi Jinping to the leadership of China in 2012. And I think the problems really mostly involve China's apparent turn away from its determination to continue to open, continue to reform, and look to continue to integrate itself into the global international rules-based system. And I think that's really the source of a lot of the problems. Also, Chinese internal insecurities plays a big role, which were certainly heightened after the great financial crisis, and we saw Chinese increased repression, crackdown on dissidents and lawyers and activists and ethnic minorities, very concerning, of course, to a broad swath of the American public and certainly officialdom. And I think, the building up of the islands in the South China Sea was a real stark signal of a change to an aggressive foreign policy in the region on the part of China. So those things really kind of coalesced with the election, I think, in the U.S. of Donald Trump, who had run on a pretty anti-China platform to sort of bring us to this point now where we're facing a kind of a major turning point.
Thank you. I think there's a genuine fear that China may be about to overtake the United States, that China aspires to world leadership, global leadership, and certainly wants to be the number one rather than the number two under the United States. Is that really the aspiration of China, or how would you see that?
Well, I think if we look at China's priorities in the world, the first priority they have is stability, internal stability and external stability. They live in a pretty rough neighborhood, and Chinese leadership spends most of its time thinking about those issues. One of the points of potential instability that has come to the fore under the leadership of Xi Jinping I didn't talk about it too much in my discussion today, but is the anti-corruption campaign. His perception that the Communist Party of China was becoming so riddled with corruption that it was going to lose legitimacy and no longer be able to lead China. And so I think, that has been another thing that they have prioritized. They also prioritize economic growth. They prioritize getting respect and legitimacy from other countries in the international system, and they prioritize the traditional sensitive areas about reintegrating parts of China into the national boundaries, so Taiwan and Tibet, Xinjiang, etc. I think if we look at what their priorities are, they're a pretty reasonable set of priorities from the standpoint of the national government, if you're China. You know, I personally don't think that the aspiration to, you know, immediate march off to global domination is what we should be worried about. Certainly China's, one of its primary goals is to have the space to continue to grow its economy and expand its influence in the world in concert with its growing set of interests. And I think that that's natural and something that does threaten the United States, but which probably should not threaten the United States, and certainly not as much as the current hyping of the China sort of threat would indicate that it does.
But when you look at the state subsidies, which a lot of Chinese companies still enjoy, when you look at the issue of intellectual property theft, which despite some improvements is still a problem, American and European and other companies complain about that. How can that be overcome? How can that be addressed so that China doesn't unfairly go get ahead and unfairly compete with other countries?
Yeah, this is a very tough problem, and we've been, you know, ever since the Chinese opening and reform, working hard to fit, you know, the Chinese huge economy into the global international economic system, which is based on market economics and all the rules and regulations of the WTO and other trading instruments. And so I think, first of all, China needs to recommit to the commitments it made when it joined the WTO to move to a real market economy, you know, separation of the state from the market and its companies. And we have to somehow insist on that. Now, we're trying to do that through the current trade negotiations. I think there's other things we could be doing and should be doing to bolster that effort. But, you know, China will have to play by the rules, or it's going to end up not being included in the global economy the way it wants to be.
Thank you. It would make sense for the United States and the Europeans to actually confront, if you like, address these problems together and basically be stronger together. That is not happening. The Trump administration has decided to also embark on a trade conflict with the Europeans as well as China. So how do we overcome and create that, perhaps that common sense inside?
As well as Canada, as well as Mexico, as well as Japan, as well as Korea. I couldn't agree with you more that be stronger together is one aspect of one thing that we should be doing that's different from the current approach. And, you know, the US and Europe have almost identical interests in making sure that other countries stick to the rules of the game, because we do, by and large, stick to the rules of the game. And if other countries don't, we're the ones that'll be disadvantaged. So I don't even think it's, you know, ganging up on China. It's just, you know, expecting China to do what it agreed to do and play fair with everyone else.
When the opening to China, the so-called opening to China, was implemented in the 1970s, first under Nixon, then under the Carter administration, there was a secret hope in the West, I would say, that China gradually would become more like us, would develop into a more democratic situation. That hasn't happened at all. You could argue actually the contrary has happened or is happening right now. Is there any chance that that original hope can still be realized?
Yeah, well, I think there is a fairly widespread misapprehension about exactly what was intended or thought by people. Now, certainly in the process of selling, you know, things like the WTO accession, you know, that China got in the late 90s, early 2000s, you know, there were probably statements made to that effect. But I think what Nixon and Kissinger meant in the phrase that I quoted in my talk from Nixon about we can't leave China forever outside the community of nations to nurse her paranoid fantasies. The idea is that bringing China into the international community would vastly improve the lives, well-being, and freedoms of the Chinese people. And I think you would be hard-pressed to say that the Chinese people are not better off today than they were prior to engagement, and that they don't enjoy more freedoms than they did. I mean, most Chinese would certainly, they travel, they go to school in foreign countries, we have foreign universities operating in China. I mean, this is all, you know, markedly different than what was the case. Of course, it's moving in a sort of regressive direction now, and I would agree with that. But in China's development, you have all these ups and downs, twists and turns. It doesn't mean that it's, you know, an unremitting direction backwards. I think we'll see the pendulum swing back in China as we've seen before. And I think, you know, it's not going to help that aspiration to disengage somehow from China or cut them off from the international community. We have to remember, we have a lot of problems with the Chinese government, but the Chinese people are overwhelmingly positively disposed to the United States and to the broader outside international community. And we are to them as well. And that we need to keep that going, because that's a huge proportion of humanity that we need to keep well disposed to one another.
And they indeed like to travel to the United States.
Exactly.
Graham Allison's book has made a big splash. It's about a great power competition. He quotes Athens and Sparta, Germany and Britain, and of course both cases and other cases he quotes, it led to a major war and a major great power clash. Is that the inevitable outcome between the competition between China and the United States?
Yeah, I think, Graham Allison's book has gotten a lot of attention, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for raising this issue onto the international stage and planting it so firmly in the consciousness even of the leader of China and the people of China. President Xi Jinping, when he met with President Obama, he raised the issue of this new model of major country relations because he said we have to avoid falling into this Thucydides trap. So he was even aware of this issue. And I think, what I would say is that we can, avoid the Thucydides trap in this case. We have international institutions, an international system that's well developed, that didn't exist in these prior cases. We have mechanisms to communicate with China and ameliorate frictions and tensions. We have crisis management to control accidents and things which we've seen activated in the recent past. And I think both the United States and China, at the end of the day, one of our overriding priorities has to be to avoid a major conflict between the two, because that would be existential. And so I think, wisdom should and can prevail. I'm an optimist on that score, and I think Graham Allison's flagged a problem, but we can handle it.
And perhaps we can learn from history.
I think we should learn from history, or we're doomed to repeat it.
Thank you. Susan Thornton, thank you very much for coming to talk to us. Thank you very much.